Second point, attitude adjustment. Let's do an attitude adjustment real quick. Attitude adjustment. Attitude adjustment is the fact that when we read the Bible, understand, a lot of people have read the Bible and say it's a book written and inspired by God. You can tell, I've been reading this for some time. Jeez, I've been reading this, paging through it every day, so you can tell. Don't mind the wear and tear, but perhaps I should cover the book. But anyways, it's good enough to read. The Bible, the mistake that people make, attitude adjustment, is that the question I would ask anybody is that, is the Bible a historical account, or is it simple literature? Or is there literature form? You get like Shakespeare and Animal Farm, which is like satire, Is it a form of literature that shouldn't be taken as non-factual or fictional, right? Or should it be taken as a historical account? And this is the attitude adjustment that I want to make. From everybody mixes things, and the whole world of Bible commentary and theology is centered around them taking it as a historical account. And this is a big, big, big mistake, because their followers, like for example the Jews, who claim to be descendants of Abraham, or descendants of the tribe of Benjamin, because according to them, the biblical account is a historical account. And this is quite unfortunate, because the attitude adjustment is to say that if we go into the Bible, we look at the Bible from this perspective, we'll always go into debate. It's like a can of worms. Like what I'm going to go into like now is say, first can of worms, Moses. How could Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Torah if Moses is a character in the book of Exodus to the last 4 books, but he's not a character in the first 4 books? So I'd be saying that God gave Moses the tablets, or he gave Moses the 5 books. So it doesn't really add up. So Moses can't be a character in the story and write the story. First, problematic thing, right? First problematic thing, if you look at the first 3 chapters of the Bible, you can tell this book is not to be taken literally. It's not literally there was day and there was night, and then he creates man, and then he goes in chapter 2, talks about how he creates man, and in chapter 3 we have a talking serpent. Nobody's ever seen a talking serpent. There's this mystical garden. It's not to be taken literally. So if Abraham is the descendant of these people, these are mystical, this is literature. So this is, the author is trying to describe or illustrate in principle the principles behind his creation. Say, in principle, this is what I did to create the world. I said, let there be light, and there was light, and then I saw it was good, and then there was evening, there was day, and then, and then half, you know what I mean? So this is illustrative speech. It is not historical. And I think that must be understood. That's the first attitude adjustment. So anyone, we have to admit, the Jews were the people that had the custom, that received the literature and created a whole culture around the literature. That's historical. But the literature itself should not be mistaken as history or historical fact. So, I'll say it in Zulu, ingane gwane. It's a folk tale. So if we look at it as a folk tale, we can start to have peace, because in a folk tale, what we ask ourselves is, what is the moral of the story? And we don't get stuck in the semantics of, hang on, why does Matthew account, how come it's different to Luke's account? You know, how come Paul's account is different to Acts account? Like, you know, how come, you know, you get what I mean? So, what is interesting about this literature is that it's written across in the context of history. But it's not historical fact. And anybody can dispute me that particularly the Old Testament, particularly the Torah, the first 5 books, and what makes up the Talmud, the Old Testament, that is not historical fact. It might have been written in the context of history, sure. And I'll give you the last perfect example of saying why it cannot be taken as historical fact. Perfect example. The book of Daniel was written. And the setting is the Israelites have now been exiled to Babylon and they've been conquered by Babylon. So what we understand, right, and I'm just going to put this here, right, what we understand by that is that, you know, here's Daniel, and people will say sometime BC, right, during Babylonian exile. Right. That's the Bible, that's the story. And then there's history, what we know from history. There's historical accounts. So what we know from historical accounts is that the nation of Babylon came. Babylon. And there was Persia. And then there was Greece. Right. So in the book of Daniel, Daniel has visions and talks to people about Babylon, Persia, and Greece. So if Daniel is living in Babylon, Daniel in the story is living in Babylon and exile, how would he know that the Persia a little bit later? Right? Let's say this is 400 BC, argument's sake. I'm not going to go into the semantics. This is 200 BC. This is 100 BC. Right? How would he know, Daniel writing this, that what's going to happen across, not even what's going to happen, he's a prophet, yes, but that there's going to be 3 nations that will come after Persia and then Greece. Daniel, or the author, must have written this book after the fact, way after Babylonian exile. So the author was not in Babylonian exile. Certainly not in Babylon. Absolutely not. So it's quite evident that the author was not Daniel. The book might be called Daniel, but the author was not Daniel. And the author was not living in Babylonian exile. This book was written after the knowledge of knowing that there was Babylon, Persia, and then Greece. So what I'm saying to you is that now when people read the Bible, attitude adjustment, this is what I'm saying, this is what the session is called, attitude adjustment. The Bible is a piece of literature that needs to be looked at in terms of literature and say, what is the moral of the story? What are the principles that can be derived from this folk tale? The same way we derive principles from a story such as Cinderella. Same way. So, the Bible is true in the sense that the principles or the idea, the moral of the story demonstrates itself to be true, because when you apply those principles in real life, you do get the same sort of result. So it is true in that sense, but it's not true in the sense of historical fact. So I think that was my last example for this. And I think we're going to go on. And I think this is the added adjustment to say, look, let us not look at the Bible as historical fact. Let us look at it as a piece of literature that has principles and values and ideas that need to be extracted and applied in our actual lives. Right? Because now this goes, so you see now how this moves away from being an issue of what I believe, what I don't believe, and research and commentary. We move away from all of that garbage, right? All of that debate and fighting amongst ourselves, and we just say, okay, let's look at it. And I don't think it will hurt anyone, regardless of what you believe. You can have whatever you believe. But let's look at it as a piece of literature that has values and principles that can be extracted from it. And let's agree on the principles that come out of it. And this is why I think very soon I'll be commissioning what's called the wine press.